Mark Gurman is reporting that Apple is in talks with Google to build their Gemini AI model into iOS. So I'm going to read some quotes here from Mark Gurman's report. The two companies are in active negotiations to let Apple license Gemini, Google's set of generative AI models, to power some new features coming to the iPhone software this year. Apple also recently held discussions with OpenAI and has considered using its model. Apple is preparing new capabilities as part of iOS 18, the next version of the iPhone operating system, based on its own AI models. Those enhancements will be focused on features that operate on its devices rather than ones delivered via the cloud. So Apple is seeking a partner to do the heavy lifting of generative AI, including functions for creating images and writing essays based on simple prompts. Since early last year, Apple has been testing its own large language model, codenamed Ajax, or Ajax, I'm going to say Ajax. Some employees also have been trying out a basic chatbot dubbed internally as Apple GPT. But Apple's technology remains inferior to tools from Google and other rivals, making a partnership look like the better option. So, when I saw this today, my initial, you just see it in the headline before I read the article, I was like, oh no, this is terrible,
Apple
right?
has failed. It's a disaster, right?
Because also, we've been talking about AI coming to iOS, right? And so the idea that they would be in March, maybe 3 months before WWDC, still kind of negotiating with people seemed like a risk. But maybe this is more, as it says in Mark's report, of using Google like they use Google, right? They're using Gemini in the way that they use Google, which is as a component of search, as a component of whatever, right? And so using them for something like that, which is quite interesting.
So think of it this way. We are in the very early stages of building these giant AI models. We've got multiple competitors out there. Google is doing this. OpenAI with Microsoft is doing this. Anthropic is doing this. There are others as well. Huge leaps are happening. Lots of players. Maybe, and also according to, I read Ben Thompson did a good analysis piece on this in Stratechery. Everybody's using GPUs. Apple can't get the GPUs. Apple has a bad relationship with NVIDIA. It's not going to happen, right?
And if you want to do this stuff, NVIDIA is where you're going right now. This is why NVIDIA has become so valuable.
So I look at this and I think, first off, for the large language model, the big thing, Apple being flexible, finding partners, seeing where it goes, being able to change partners as they go if necessary for this component of what they're doing is, I think, a better approach than saying, no, not invented here. We're going to build our own thing and it's not going to be as good. Now, they may be working on their own thing too. They may not be. We have to talk about what they've been working on. But I'm reminded of Apple or of Google Maps on the iPhone.
Yeah.
Right. Remember, they did Google Maps as the Maps app for a long time, and then they were like, "Aha! Now we have our thing," and they switched, and there were actually problems, right? Because they switched too soon. But right now, you're launching the iPhone. Google Maps is the one to do, and here you've got competing models. I think the question is, what is this used for, right? And I think that there's a way of envisioning this, which is more of a plugin. It's more of a thing that happens sometimes for certain queries. And I honestly think it's also a resource that might be queried by an Apple model running on your device.
Yes.
And that this is so I think there was an easy way to portray this, which is, Apple failed. And now they have turned to Google for help. But I don't know. I think that it's way more complex than that. And also, I'm not sure that I would read this report as Apple has decided to use Google's. Also, it says it's in negotiations, right? Nothing's announced. But I think that if they are working with Google, they also are keeping a keen eye out on all the other players in here too, because there's nothing stopping Apple from choosing a different horse at some point. I know this isn't Rumor Roundup, but I just mentioned a horse. There, that's yeah.
The way I
look,
a
rumor.
Mentioning the Google Maps thing is interesting, and I would wonder how much that kind of thinking would play into any deal that Google did with Apple here, because if you're a Google and doing this deal, you don't want that to happen, right? How much control they would have in this, I don't know, but Apple haven't built a search engine, right? And so like they still rely on Google for that. That whatever that deal is probably what Google would like this deal to be. And you know, like saying
this deal might even offset that deal, right? Apple might be like, just credit us our AI costs from out of the search deal.
Well, until the point that Google works out monetization with Gemini, and then they'll probably rev share that the same way they rev share Google searches. You know, and I was thinking today, like, basically, as the day has gone on, I have become more encouraged about this thinking, where it is that idea of like, there is a strength in not trying to like trick yourself or trick others. If you're not capable of something, or if your work isn't as good and you have the opportunity to benefit from better work, then you should do that, right? Like, Apple is new to this world.
Yes.
Just because this world only existed like 2 years ago for every company other than the ones that were already in it,
right.
You know?
And maybe they can catch up, and maybe they want to, and maybe they don't want to, but
who knows?
But what they don't want to do is ship something that is not good enough now, but they do need to get in the game now. And also there's an argument that in the short term, this is not one of those Tim Cook doctrine things, which is really a Steve Jobs thing, which is, you should build everything that is core to your business. It's like, this is a little bit ancillary and it's a little bit new, and they might need to build this and work on it so that they can use it eventually and have their own model. But right now, it doesn't seem like they need to do that necessarily. And there's other stuff that they can focus on that is very Apple specific. So what I'm talking about here is, if Apple builds a model like that rabbit thing, right? The whole idea of that little rabbit gadget is that they've got a model. All-one, yeah. They built a model that controls other models. And like, that's what Apple should be doing, right? Apple should have probably an on-device model, and there's some evidence that they're working on kind of like the smaller on-device usable models. What you want is a system that kicks it all off, which is Siri or next-gen Siri or Siri with AI or whatever they end up calling it, where you say, do this thing. And then it knows, like, I can do a search, I can do this on device, I can go to this data source, I can go to this data source, a bunch of different data sources. I can control my apps on the system, I can do shortcuts, I can do all of these different things. That's like Apple's secret sauce, which is at that high level, user level, controlling all of that. Now, some of the stuff that they do is going to need the big, whether it's Gemini or GPT or something like that, and needs to know how to use it. So you train the model to know how to use Gemini, and then it crafts the query so the user doesn't have to do it to Gemini to get very specifically back what it wants from Gemini. And then maybe it just replays that, or maybe it analyzes what Gemini gives back and then gives back its own summarization of that, right? Like, so the idea here is Apple builds something at a very high level that the users interact with, and one of its data sources is Gemini. Because I don't envision this being that, Siri is just Gemini now. I don't think that's what it's going to be.
One of the things that I was thinking about, right, was like parts of Siri powered by Google Gemini, in the way that the weather data used to say from the Weather Channel, in the way that the betting lines come from DraftKings, the way that stocks data comes from Yahoo. Like, Apple uses sources for stuff that they either don't have or don't want to have.
Yeah.
And this could be part of that, right? That if you say to Siri, create an image for me, that it goes out to Gemini and does that, instead of them trying to build something of their own right now. Like, there's a lot of reporting that Apple have been, and they've actually published some stuff, some research papers, of things that they are building. And there are these models that look like they could run on device, but they are not as powerful as the text generation and image generation models, partly because they maybe don't want them to be, maybe partly because they haven't gotten to that point yet, but maybe they are focusing more on being able to talk to your computer and having it understand what it wants you to do, and doing it locally, like all local stuff, like take that photo for me and flip it to 90 degrees and publish it on Mastodon, right? Like that's the hope, right, that I have, that you'll be able to do this kind of stuff on your computer. But then if you say to it, like, write me a term paper on this or whatever,
then
it's going to go out to Gemini and get that, because that's where that stuff is going out. It's finding stuff on the web. Like, it is a different part of the stack. So, And it is that idea, say like, and you mentioned Ben Thompson's piece earlier, and he said something that like he believes, and I think this makes a lot of sense, that right now Google is the only company in the world that could provide the scale that the iPhone would use.
Right. This
like
is that
Apple
scale
can't
problem
build
that we've
it,
talked
and nobody
about
else
before.
has it. Yeah.
So many people use the iPhone, so you push an iPhone update, and then everybody's using this AI feature. Even if you ship it as a beta and people have to turn it on or whatever, like the amount, I mean, you think that there is a lot of AI querying going on now. There's not, right? But if every iPhone in the world is doing AI querying, you've got to have the scale to support that, and who can do that? And I don't know enough about like the scale Google provides versus the scale that Microsoft and OpenAI have, and what else is out there. But it's certainly, if not just Google, it's a very small group of companies that can actually offer this kind of scale. And again, this shows you why what you need if you're Apple is an agent on top of the iPhone that is providing a barrier between you and the expensive and slower model that's out there in the cloud, right? And you don't want every query to go out there, right? You want it to start on your model on device, or maybe even your model in the cloud, and then only in certain circumstances. It's like having caching or something like, but even if you're taking a fraction of those queries and putting them to Gemini or GPT or whatever, it's still going to be enormous amount of data happening.
Can you imagine like a Google executive coming on stage, quote unquote stage, at WWDC, like the old days, like back in the old days?
Absolutely.
Where
Although
they bring out Eric.
My guess would be it would be more like something like we've worked with many providers, including Google and so and so as our data sources, like something where it's like not just like, thank you, Google, but maybe,
Look, I think, yes, it depends. If Google are going to be the main partner, they're going to want to be very public and loud about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the same way that Microsoft and OpenAI have their relationship, right? Like they're both very loud about it. Especially Microsoft maybe a little bit more loud about it, but Google's going to want that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I can see it. I don't think it's a problem. Again, there are a lot of people out there who are like, oh, that'll never happen. And it's like, well, totally.
Oh,
if it benefits Apple, it will happen.
I mean, they had Bob Iger as part of the Vision Pro, like.
Yeah,
that made sense,
Yeah, that's a partner, more of a friend, but yeah,
Google's a partner.
If this is right,
Google's a very. They give a lot of money for that partnership.
They are partners already. It's absolutely the case, and part of me wonders about this Mark Gurman report. I don't think Mark Gurman is generally the source who gets used by inside Apple for stuff like this, but like one way to read this is they're unhappy with their negotiations with Anthropic or OpenAI, and so they're going to leak that they're working on this thing with Google to put more pressure on them in negotiations. I don't think that's what's going on here.
No, I think Google's the right partner. Like if
probably so.
If I'm Apple and I want a partner, they are the partner. They're like, if anyone's going to be as ethically responsible as possible, you'd expect Google would probably be that one because of their size, right? That like. I mean, look what's happened already, right? With Gemini, they messed up and they are being dragged through in a way that I don't necessarily think that other AI companies would be. And so, like, I think for Apple, Google's probably the best partnership because they're not like the scrappy upstart, right? They have like an institutional way of doing things that probably will match theirs.
Keep in mind that I do think that this is one of those things that if Apple makes a partnership with Google and they're unhappy with it, that they could just go to another provider.
Yes.
I do think that this is early days enough that they might sign an agreement to use them for, maybe it's an even exclusive agreement, but it's like it's not going to be forever. And if things go another way, they can do that. But it also helps power Google.
It would just be an API. Exactly. Because that's how that's just the way that this technology is being used by everyone, right? It's all APIs.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you have to change your models. Maybe you probably tweak Apple's models to, you've trained them on using Gemini instead of GPT, and you might have to change that. But like that's the idea. And I think this is right. Like at a high level, this is Apple knowing what it can and can't do, Apple not building its own search engine. I mean, it does have one, and Siri uses it some, but like there's no Apple search engine, right? They use Google as their default, and like that's an example of Apple being like, no, Google is going to do that business, and also it keeps it at arm's length a little bit, which, like you said, I think is a good thing for Apple to be like, well, it's there, you're using them. And the truth is, Apple has decided that it's very important that they get into this because everybody's getting there and they're worried that they're going to get left behind and that it's going to change the nature of Apple's business and threaten the iPhone in particular and devices in general, potentially. And so if they want this to work, you got to use the best, right? You got to use the best possible. If you want this to work and you're working on a model and it's not good enough, you can't launch with it. You have to use the good models. You have to. You cannot launch and say, "Oh, we're committed to AI," and then have a laggard, an afterthought kind of product. You got to have it work at your level of standard, even if it's outsourcing. And the beauty of it is, like I said, I think the right way for them to approach it, at least right now, is to build on top of the model. So you build the intelligence that you control that is on your device. So your users are interacting with your model. Presumably, because again, I'm a big fan of this idea, it's also going to be able to not just use, it's not like it's going from Siri to Gemini. That's not what it's doing. It's going from Siri to a decision about where it goes next. Does it go to Gemini? Does it go to an app on your phone that it knows how to talk to and get data back and then put in a different app, right? All those shortcuts, intense things are ripe for API control or by an AI model. So then you've built the secret sauce, and okay, Gemini is underneath it somewhere. That's like saying powered by Bing or powered by Google search. It's a part of the bigger product. It's not the product. And that's why I'm more positive about this report too than when I first saw it, is that I'm kind of picturing, this isn't like Apple hands its AI ambitions to Google. This is Apple needs this other piece of its AI product for now, and it's going to plug in a partner to do this kind of stuff, especially like if you're in Pages and you're like, give me a paragraph here. Then like, well, what model is best at that, and then use it. I think that's probably what their approach is going to be, and I think that that's probably a good one. Which is not to say that they might not keep trying to build a replacement in the background, so that in 5 years they can do a Google Maps, Apple Maps kind of thing. But maybe less disruptive. But who knows? Like, or maybe they become a partner, like with Google or somebody else, and say, we're going to actually work with you to improve your model, and we share in it. Because there's a lot of proprietariness of stuff in the tech industry is kind of broken down as things end up with this AI stuff. Like everybody's like, oh, we need a partner for this because this is really expensive. Who knows? Maybe something like that happens and Apple actually partners with Google on Gemini. That's also a possibility.